Schroder, and I'm a friend of Harold Dickens. We worked together a long time ago, and we kept in touch. What was it, 10 years ago?
About that.
Harold asked me to come here to have a conversation with a professor from UCLA, and we're going to talk about race relations. And it can be an uncomfortable subject because people are afraid to speak about race relations. I think, where I don't think we need to be. I think we need to give each other some grace when we talk about race relations, because it's an uncomfortable subject, and it's not something I talk about frequently. It's not something that it's not obviously something you teach. So I just would like to ask for a little grace if I say things that are offensive, or I say things, because in my heart I have no ill will towards any person of color. And so if things come out perhaps like wrong, please ask me to clarify, because fortunately I grew up with some black friends, and because of that experience, and best friends, and being part of their worlds and their homes, and knowing their parents and things. And so I have, I think, a unique perspective, because there's not a lot of white folks. There's a lot of white folks, but there's also a lot of white folks that don't have black friends. And so I think I'm uniquely positioned to discuss some of those race relations, at least from my experience, from my limited experience. But I'm excited to talk about it, because I think that's how we're going to start bridging the gap and realizing that we're not all each other's enemies based on skin color, at least from most of us. There may be some of that racism that exists, and I want to hear about it. But structurally, that you've seen and observed. But I know that, like, for example, my experience, like, I don't have racist people in my life. I don't have.
Is this part of our introduction here? Let's come back to those.
Sorry.
That's okay. That was a beautiful introduction.
Sorry.
We know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
Let's, Professor Paul von Blum, would you tell, in your words, what do you want folks to know about you?
And I'm happy to. My name's Paul von Blum. I've been a member of faculty of the University of California for 53 years, older than you are.
Sir. Congratulations.
I tell my students that I used to be young. They don't believe me. But I am also a lawyer by original training. I continue to be an active member of the California Bar. I'm not uncomfortable in talking about race. I do this every day.
Yes, sir.
I'm a civil rights activist. I have been. I was one of those kids who went south. I was involved. I knew John Lewis throughout his long and, I think, magnificent life. I was not a close friend, but we stayed in touch intermittently throughout his life. I took seriously what he said, that one should always be involved in good trouble. I was in good trouble. I was intermittently, in my youth, in jail. I challenged police authorities. I'm proud of that. I had a criminal record. It was over 50 years ago. I have no idea what ever happened to that. I don't care. I've been teaching African American studies at UCLA since the early 80s, and I teach courses dealing with race. And I'm not afraid to challenge people on their attitudes, but I'm very friendly at it.
Okay.
I'm not confrontational, although I can challenge people in the views. I do have many African American friends, because I write books on African American art, and I spend a lot of time in African American settings. I was on many of the demonstrations last summer, despite my age. I mean, I wore a mask, and nothing happened to me. I'm now fully vaccinated, so I'm obviously fine. I also was part of the cadre of legal defense lawyers, and I took a small part in defending some of the people who were arrested. That's my story, and it's much longer than that.
Yes, sir.
But I'm happy to talk to you, and I can be involved in the friendly debate without being contentious about it.
Great. I think it's a discussion, a conversation, because I'm not prepared to debate. I'm not a debater.
That's
But
And let me just introduce myself before we get into the dialectic, so that because we know we can have a dialectic and a discussion without a debate. There's nothing, and I want to say, because I wanted Paul to introduce himself, and I can call you Paul and Ricky, and I'm Harold.
Absolutely.
you said you wanted grace. We're going to do you better. We're going to give you love and kindness
Awesome.
and the truth as we see it. And we know you're going to give us the same.
Okay.
Of course, I'm Harold W. Dickens III. I'm an attorney at law. I've been practicing just about 10 years. We're here in my office, and Ricky's a friend of mine and a client. And in full disclosure, Professor Paul von Blum was my professor, and he wrote a recommendation for me, and he's part of the reason I got into USC Law School, so he's part of my success story, and I really appreciate and love him and respect him, just like Ricky, and I'm happy and honored and privileged to have these wonderful friends to be able to talk to. But we're here to talk about, we're here to talk about important issues that matter.
Yes.
And so let's just hop right in, because
Yeah.
I've got a couple of notes here, but obviously you guys are already talking, so I want to just kind of guide it a little. Let's talk first about identity. And I think we're going to always respect our elders, and we're going to generally start first with the professor. And we can see he's asked us to call him Paul, and Mr. Ricky Schroder has asked us to call him Ricky, and I'm Harold. So talk about, and we'll just take just a couple of minutes on identity.
Okay, well, I think identity is important. I don't want to be excessively involved in identity politics, but I think identity is important. And I encourage my students to be proud of their identity. My black students who proudly call themselves African Americans, I think is good. And I think, for example, last night I had my class, and I encourage my African American students to talk about their experiences and to talk about why it's important for them to say Black Lives Matter. And the reason that I ask them to do that is because they use that slogan because in the past Black lives have not mattered. They all recognize, everybody should recognize that all lives matter. Everybody knows that. It would be absolutely ridiculous to say that all lives don't matter. The reason they say Black Lives Matter is because historically Black lives have not mattered. And by saying that, it promotes the fact that Black people do matter, and they do matter. Because of my personal experience in Black communities, it's really important to promote that Black lives matter, and they matter more than just being servile, being more than just people who work in low-level positions. They matter because they should be involved in every aspect of American life. And I think the reason that we have the Black Lives Matter movement today is to elevate millions of people into realms of respectability that heretofore they've never had. And so I think that movement is particularly important. It came out of the Trayvon Martin case in 2013, and I was really proud to become part of that movement. And I have to say that in my experience, Black people are not racist. They have always welcomed me with, I must say, open arms. Way back in the 60s when I used to walk into Black Panther Party headquarters in North Oakland, nobody ever told me I wasn't welcome. Never.
Yeah.
Not a minute of even looking at me in a strange way.
I really don't know
experience.
who believes Black lives don't matter. Like, I honestly don't know people that believe Black lives don't matter.
I have found
I don't know them.
I have found that.
You found people like
Yes,
that think
yes.
Black lives don't matter?
Yeah, I have seen people who get nervous at the proclamation of Black Lives Matter when they say, well, all lives matter. Now, as I said, all lives matter, but people say that in opposition to Black Lives Matter. And so when they say that defensively, and some do, that's when, in my judgment, it becomes racist. Not consciously, because so much of racism is unconscious. It's unconscious. It's when people, look, I've been in large classes where I have maybe 4 or 5 African American students. Not this one because it's an African American studies class, where my African American students will say something, and the white professor will say, "And what do you think?" As if one African American student is supposed to represent 30 million people. That's unconscious racism. And so they feel it. And when I tell my students that African Americans are made to feel different in 1,000 different ways every week, shopping while black, driving while black, studying while black. It's so much of it is unconscious. So much of it, and they know it. They know it.
It's unconscious being directed towards them.
Yeah.
They're white people or fear of black people.
Fear,
what is it?
Yeah, I mean fear. I mean sometimes it's overt. I mean afraid to get into an elevator, walking across the street, just unconscious gestures. It happens so often.
It's sad.
I have hundreds of stories that my black students have told me, and it happens so often. I wish it weren't the case.
Yeah. Let me ask you about Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives, of course, matter. Is it the organization of BLM that maybe isn't in alignment with the statement that Black Lives Matter? Like, are they in alignment as an organization with their goals, with their tenets, with their... Like, I don't know much about Black Lives Matter organization. I'm trying to learn, but one of the things that concerned me was I did some research, and it said that the nucleus family, like the Black Lives Matter foundational position is that the nuclear family, how do they feel about the Western white nuclear family? Is that something, what I'm getting at is there cultural differences between black folk and white folk in the way that we raise our children? Is black culture more of a matriarchal society? I'm curious. That patriarchal, or is it? Because Native Americans, for example, is a total matriarchal society, where when I think about black culture, with my limited knowledge, I think of it's a pretty strong matriarchal or balanced led culture, as opposed to the traditional Western European father led patriarchal. Would you agree with that or no?
Not especially. It depends. I mean, there are a lot of single mothers leading, and there are strong structural and economic reasons for that. And unemployment is much higher in African American communities, and so you have those problems. But I know a lot of families with highly traditional.
So is BLM's goal to change the nuclear family, to change that structure, and more into like a village, raising of a village atmosphere?
Sometimes, and I don't think the Western model is something that should be elevated as the pinnacle of the highest values. I mean, I grew up in that family. Many of my artist friends grew up that way, in highly traditional ways. But I don't think that should be the entire model of what should be emulated as the only.
Well, I mean, what should be emulated is what works best for the children, right? What works best for them to be successful moving forward, whatever that may be. Whatever we need to do as adults and parents, to provide for them so that they can have a better world, better future. So what I'm getting at is I'm reading. Can I bring him up?
Yeah, bring him up.
This Congressman Burgess Owens, he called me a couple weeks ago, and we had a nice phone call, and then we've kept in touch since. And I'm reading his book. I'm halfway through it, and this man is very wise, very wise man. And some of the things in it that he speaks about, I haven't read the whole book, but some of the things he speaks about it are resonate with me. And one being that he sees the biggest challenge for the black community as the breakdown of the family in the black community, and the external forces that are creating that, like perhaps the drug cycle, the drugs coming in, and the prison cycle, and just that whole machine of, So he theorizes some of that. He theorizes how about in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the black middle class was expanding, was growing, and there was he grew up in a segregated community, and so he was talking about how in his community, the black people took great pride in competing against the white community. They had their own community, and they had their own.
You should look more closely at what happened during the Reagan years and the way in which
the drugs.
What Reagan did with dismantling all the wonderful programs of the New Deal. That was what Reaganism was all about. Cut out the New Deal, and it was continued under both Bushes, and they created havoc economically. It was not only the black community that suffered; it was working class whites, excuse me, who suffered.
Back to the BLM though for a second. so that model. So I think some of our conflict comes from the way our peoples, I mean, in Africa, wasn't it more of historically more of a village setting and a communal setting of raising families, raising children, as opposed to the Northern European experience, which is more like in small nuclear families? Was it different the way our cultures, and therefore some of the conflicts we see today?
What's the point?
Well, I'm just
You're not
trying to
gonna go
understand.
back. We're not going to go back to an African tribal
No.
culture. They're here. I mean, they are African American because they're African roots. What we need, I mean, the big problem. This is going to sound extraordinarily radical, but I believe it. What we need is a system of reparation payments. I mean, your congressman friend would be horrified by that. Would be absolutely horrified.
I'm willing to listen
The
to
whole
it.
Republican Party would be horrified by that.
What would that cost? I'm just
A
curious.
lot.
Do we have an idea?
A lot. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, but yes, it would cost billions, maybe
Trillions.
It might. It might. I'm in favor of massive governmental expenditures, and that would be a massive redistribution of our wealth. I'm in favor of that.
So you are a socialist.
I absolutely am a
Absolute
socialist,
socialist, okay.
but I'm a democratic socialist in the tradition of Bernie Sanders, for whom I voted twice.
Mhm.
So I make no bones about
Right.
that. I'm doing my classes online
Right.
because all of us are. We're going to go back in the fall, but I think sometimes as my students see my office, such as it is, it's a mess. But sometimes as they see it, they can see my Bernie Sanders 2020
Yeah.
hat. Sometimes as they pan around, yes, I voted for Bernie.
It was stolen from Bernie. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually pleased with what President Biden is doing. I'm
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised. But yes, I do believe in the redistribution of wealth. I like his wealth tax proposal. I like Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax. I'm not.
May I interject briefly? Just to point out that, don't you also believe in redistribution, Ricky? Didn't you say that, use an analogy of a boat, that if you put all the resources on one side of a boat, the boat's going to tip over, and that there has to be some kind of symmetry in the distribution, otherwise
Correct.
it
The
creates
boat has to be
instability?
somewhat balanced, or else it will capsize.
So
For
are you a
sure.
socialist too?
I don't think I'm a socialist. I don't think so. I'm not a socialist.
But so what is your take on redistribution? Do you think
my
Bezos
take is that 25% of Americans pay 87% of the federal income tax. 25%. That's already a big burden on 1/4 of our taxpayers to pay 87%. So I don't know how much more we can tax certain people. I think the elites, the uber elites, they absolutely can.
Jeff Bezos supports a wealth tax.
Can contribute more.
That just came out. He just came out of the news saying that you should tax. He supports a wealth tax of taxing the rich. This is Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon.
What I prefer about more taxes, what I would prefer to do instead of more taxes is just let's spend our money better. Let's spend our money better.
What's our biggest expenditure?
But we need more of it.
Yeah, we need more.
But what's our biggest expenditure? You know this. What do we spend our money on?
The war machine.
The military.
The war machine. So
Big.
yeah, I have a problem with the way the military's been used the last 30 years. Since my adult life, I have a problem with what happened in Iraq with the fake WMD
And
then
wars.
and that war. I have a problem with them pulling out, Obama pulling out and creating a vacuum for ISIS. I have a problem with Afghanistan sending 2,500 guys to die there and 20,000 amputees and $2 trillion.
Horrible.
For what? For what? What did we get, right?
Nothing.
So I think it's a matter of using the monies we have. Obviously, if we have to tax, we'll tax, but using our monies better.
I agree.
And can I make one small point? Because you guys are having a great conversation, and I just want to say, because you said he's a socialist and what you believe, but I have my own perspective, and I just want to point out that I agree with the thrust of what you're saying, that we didn't get as American people what we should have. But it's useful to point out what the people who went over there got, because they were able to secure the oil channels through the Caspian Sea. They were able to secure the water resources, and this is the reason I'm saying this, they were able to secure the opioid trade, because when Bin Laden came in, he burned down all the poppy fields. But when the U.S. government went in there, they said, no, we need our opioids. And that's why there's an opioid pandemic or epidemic. We need to tie the war machine and the war in Afghanistan to the amount of opioids that Americans have been consuming, because we know from the declassified COINTELPRO documents that the military has been involved in distributing narcotics for several years, decades. And so I'm just going to let that hang for the audience, and then please go back to now. Here's a question. Let me take things a little bit off a little bit, because I don't want to be unfair and let's say biased even in the way we talk about identity, because identity isn't only about blacks. What about whites? And so when my first topic that I wrote down was identity, and since we started with Paul, I'm going to start with you. Can I ask you, how do you identify? Are you white?
No, I don't identify as white. I just identify as an American.
No,
Literally.
well, I have a more complex identity. When I fill out the census, it doesn't, or the other official documents, I have very little choice except to write white. But I come from a Holocaust family, and so I don't like writing white, but I have no choice. I mean, I'm ethnically Jewish, and I would rather do that.
So in terms of how you think of yourself, do you think of yourself as a white man?
I have no choice because I have the white privilege of the skin.
Do I have a choice?
No,
I have to. So
you don't have a choice.
to a black person that seems black to us,
Who's this?
Yeah, a little.
Sorry.
that seems black to us, and if a black man said, like this man right here, if I don't know what he feels, but I can pick another Owens named Candace Owens or another. If they said to you, I am
they have
not
no
black.
choice. Well, he's black. You're black.
Isn't there something oppressive about that, forcing me to have an identity as a lower class?
You have to have, whether you want to call yourself that, the rest of the world is going to see you as that. Look at Barack Obama. I mean, he writes down black, even though he has a white mother. He always writes African American, though he's half white and half black, but he looks black. And the rest of the world is going to look at him as black.
And like Sammy Sosa from the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
He said he's not black.
But he looks black. And when he walks down the street, when he's not taking steroids, and eating a whole lot of home runs, when the rest of the world looks at him, they identify him as black. I've had Afro-Latinos a lot.
So Ricky doesn't identify as white.
Well, but people are going to look at you as white, and
Right.
they're going to look at me as white.
So does he have to identify as white?
Well, in the census, you're going to have to.
On the form?
Yeah.
You can't just say other?
You can.
You
Can't
can.
you just say human?
You can, but that's misleading. In actual real life, people are going to look at you as white. They're going to look at me. I'll give you. I had an interesting comment from a student last night when we were talking about that. I mentioned to you. I'm not sure you were there. I was sentenced to go to law school after I was convicted of these misdemeanor offenses. The judge said 3 years in law school or 6 months in jail after I was convicted. And I didn't like law school. I did fine, and I graduated and I passed the bar. That was the choice. And I had a black student that said, if I were a black defendant, I wouldn't have the choice of going to law school. That was white privilege. And she was right. She was right. If there was a black defendant in my position, I was articulate, and the judge got pissed off at that. Because I was so verbal with him. He was going to put me in my place. But a black defendant, not as verbal as I, would probably not have had that choice. And so that's a function of white privilege. And I recognized that, and I told her she was right. So the rest of the world, as I walk down Wilshire Boulevard or walk in my neighborhood, they see me as white. I run every morning. I ran this morning. They see me as white, even though I'm uncomfortable with that designation because of a Holocaust Jewish identity. I can't change that. You can't change it, and you can't change it either. That's the public perception. So I live with it, and I think you have to live with it. If you're walking down, no, unfortunately, and this is horrible, with your hair, if you were to walk in some neighborhoods in LA, somebody would call the cops. That's unfortunate. If you were to walk in Brentwood like that, or if you were to walk in Bel Air, just sauntering down the street, I regret to say that somebody would get on the telephone and call the police and say there's somebody suspicious in the neighborhood. That shouldn't be, because you have every constitutional right to do that, but they would do it anyway. You know it, and I know it.
They made it just. So,
What would happen if I walked down Compton with his hair is his identifying feature, but if I walked down with like a Trump hat, what would happen to me?
Nobody would call the police, but you would.
No, they wouldn't call the police.
But they would.
But what would happen
They
to
would
me?
say some stuff. They would say,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work the other way. I lived in D.C. a couple of times because I taught at the UC D.C. My wife and I we walked a couple of times at Anacostia, which is all black.
they would ask for your autograph. But go
You
ahead.
know, and we were friendly. I've lived in, and you know, we looked different. I mean, we were the only white people walking in Anacostia, and I was friendly. I stopped and saw the children. I like kids, and people are friendly. Nobody, even though
I'll tell you a story about Compton. I was making a movie called Across the Tracks with Brad Pitt. It was like 1990, the height of the crack cocaine
yeah, it's a
epidemic.
tough place, and
So we were at Compton High shooting, and they told me, don't leave set.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to leave set, so I got in my car at lunchtime, and I drove over to a local place, serving a fast grill, serving burgers and stuff. The guy in line with me, real nice guy, black guy, and he talked to me about Silver Spoons, and he grew up watching Silver Spoons, and we're sitting there chatting. And then I just wanted to check on my car. I had a 944 white Porsche, probably not the best thing to take around. I go around the corner and I look, and the back hatch is open, and my two doors are open, and there's three guys pulling out my stereo and my CD player. So I started yelling, and you could tell that they were totally drugged out. They weren't even like present. They were just, and I started yelling, and they didn't even look at me. They didn't even respond. They just kind of looked up and ignored me. So the guy I was in line with, he's like, he heard me yelling, and he came over and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "My car's getting ripped off." He went over to his car and he pulled out a shotgun from the trunk. And he walked over to those three guys in my car and he pointed at them and he said, "You get out of that motherfucker's car right now." And they got out. And then he looked at me and he said, you better leave. You don't belong around here." And so that guy saved my ass.
But let's be fair.
And that's happened before.
It was your car that didn't belong there, not you.
It was,
if I drove that car over there,
yeah, no, I'm not saying it was me. I'm not saying it was me, my skin color.
Yeah, no.
Right, but it was your car.
It was the car.
And you probably didn't belong there either, but it wasn't because you were white.
It can be. Look, I understand that. I mean, I walked with my wife in Tremé in New Orleans. It's an all black neighborhood, and we were followed by a couple of young, probably gangsters, and an older black guy said, "Look, you be real careful." I know. I mean, we're old. I have the white hair.
Yeah.
And those guys were stalking us, and that was.
The point is, though, that didn't change my heart, right?
No, it doesn't change me either.
It doesn't change the heart.
It doesn't change me either, and there's no doubt that they.
But that would change some people's hearts.
Yeah, it would,
Right.
and I know that. I know that they're unemployed. They need the.
They were on
money.
drugs.
They need the money, and it's a real issue.
Yeah.
I'm pretty fearless. I've walked in places that a lot of white folks wouldn't. I went the second day of the LA Rebellion in '92, and I walked down on Crenshaw Boulevard. A little dicey. My hair was not quite as white, and here I am.
Yeah.
This is a great conversation, and Paul has about a couple hours to spend with us, so we want to make sure we maximize that time. No, you're staying for the rest of the evening.
Whatever you got.
I can't. I'm still
teasing.
teaching, and I've got.
No, but so I'm just asking, begging
You want to
forgiveness.
shape it.
Forgiveness for
You can edit
coming
it
in
any way
here
you want.
and molding this conversation a little bit. I want to throw in a little bit of clickbait here, if you want to call it that. Go ahead. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was saying if you could set that phone a little closer, facing towards
okay,
Paul.
no, that,
yeah,
so
yeah,
thank you. That makes sense. We want to get your
Okay.
We want to
Yeah,
get
you're
your
good.
audio.
You're good. Okay.
You're saying important things. We want to make sure we get it. Here's the thing. I'm going to set up a premise, and we're not going to argue about it, but we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
If I say something wrong, correct me later. Generally speaking, I would say that Ricky's more hostile to Antifa and more sympathetic to the January 6th protesters that were in Washington, D.C. More sympathetic. I would say that Paul is probably more sympathetic to Antifa
Not really.
and less sympathetic to the protesters at the Capitol Hill riot.
Okay.
I would say that I'm sympathetic to both Antifa and the Capitol Hill riots, and I ask the question here today: aren't the people outraged for good reasons, and shouldn't everybody be in the streets, is the question I'm asking. Shouldn't the Antifa and the Trump people be getting together and saying we're all catching hell because of Reaganomics, and that's the real reason, and we're being distracted by culture and race? Go ahead, you say no.
I think it's false equivalency. Antifa is a very fringe group. They're not organized. I'm not fond of them. I think every group, I am obviously a committed leftist. They are leftist lunatics for the most part. I'm not fond of them. They come out.
They're violent.
Many of them are. I oppose that.
Do you oppose violence?
Generally, there are times when violence is probably necessary. For my best example is South Africa, where Nelson Mandela finally had no option except to go to the armed struggle, because nonviolence would not have worked in South Africa. They had to do what they had to do.
I thought he was peaceful, Mandela.
No, he was not.
And
No,
he was like Gandhi. And
no, he was not.
He was not.
Nelson
He was labeled
Mandela.
a terrorist. Yeah.
No, Nelson Mandela.
I thought he was peaceful.
No, Nelson Mandela went to the armed struggle. I spent a lot of time in South Africa. I know all about that.
Yeah,
the
sure.
ANC tried to be peaceful. It was impossible. Nelson Mandela went to the armed struggle. I knew many of the people who were involved in that. So that was an example where violence had to be. If you were on the slave ships, you had to do violence. So
To get free.
To get free, you had to kill your oppressors. John Brown had to do what he had to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, I never engaged in violence in the civil rights movement. I was always peaceful. Now, Antifa, a lot of them are left-wing lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened on January 6th was an insurrection, and they were full of white nationalists, white racists.
Please.
No, they were. They were.
Okay.
There is nothing that you cannot defend the indefensible.
My sister was there. My niece was there. They're not white racists.
Many of them were.
Okay,
They
some.
had no business breaking the law to bust into the Capitol.
I agree with that.
They have no business,
No business.
doing.
No.
A peaceful protest was fine, even
Yeah.
though the premise was utterly absurd.
Yeah.
The election was
But Paul,
fair.
can I ask, is there anger as Americans at the system justified?
No, because they were operating on a false premise. Donald Trump lost the election. He lost the election, period. They created this whole false narrative that the election was stolen. Nonsense. Totally nonsense. Joe Biden is the lawfully elected president of the United States.
I disagree.
And Ricky's going to respond. Ricky
Sorry.
has a good time to respond, but I want to follow up just with one question, because I hear your point. If their premise is that the election was stolen, but if their premise is that the government officials are greedy and corrupt, and is that something to be angry about?
Be angry about it and peacefully protest. You cannot storm the Capitol.
Agreed.
And
Agreed.
then
Agreed.
so
That
many
was
people with Confederate flags.
agreed.
And
Nobody
one
should have
with
breached.
Nazi-
Nobody should have breached the door. It was inappropriate. Totally agree. Inappropriate. But there was tens and tens and tens of thousands that didn't go inside. That did it right. That stayed outside.
Fine, but they have every right to do that. They have every right. to
But
do
going
that.
inside, it was a bad thing.
Every right. They can have
It was-
all the protests they want.
They got swept
absolutely-
up and caught up in the moment.
And we all agree that they shouldn't
First
have tried
Amendment.
to storm the Capitol. But Ricky, though, can you give a voice to what it is? I assume you identify with that group on some level. Let us
The
understand.
reason
Help
I don't
Paul
think the
to
election's
understand.
fair.
Help Paul to
Okay.
understand why are middle white Americans so angry.
The reason we are concerned for our country and our children's futures and our grandchildren's future is because what we saw happen on this election was a coordinated suppression of voter facts, of information to the voter. We think, specifically for me, Hunter Biden's laptop, which is now
Trivial.
it's not trivial because
It doesn't matter what Hunter Biden did. If he wound
If
up,
his father benefited and his family, if Hunter Biden and his family benefited financially because of his father's positions in the government, that's illegal, and can't
then fine, indict him.
can't.
Hunter Biden is such a ridiculous distraction.
Okay, but what I'm saying is the mainstream media, which I call Marxist streaming media at this point,
It's not
they
Marxist.
hid the Hunter Biden. They said it was Russian disinformation 10 days before the election. We had the business partners for the Bidens on television, Bobulinski, talking about their business deals. The FBI has this laptop 2 years and they did nothing about it.
Where does
So
this-
we believe that there's a cover-up, all of us. We believe there's a cover-up that's been happening, a deep state cover-up.
Deep state? Where does this come from?
Where's it come from? It comes from not trusting what happened this election.
Let me apply a little bit of okay, Paul. Noam Chomsky would say that there are corporate conglomerates, transnational corporations that have more power than local governments.
They always have.
But that's what we mean by deep state. We mean that there's individuals who give orders to Biden and orders to other individuals,
Correct.
and they basically have to follow them. Otherwise, they'll.
We believe
take
there's a
their
shadow
funding.
government, probably within the CIA. It started in 1947
And they
when the
want,
NSC was started.
and they're
And they
stopping-
wanted consistency in government and policy.
and they're
And they didn't want, when there was a new election, policies to
and
change.
they're stopping Donald Trump from a second term.
Now, again, now that's fair.
What?
Let's address what Paul is saying. Why in the world
Would they-
would elite rich people not want Donald Trump to be president? That's the biggest
Well,
contradiction
all
with
of-
QAnon. It's like
Well,
he's
for some
one of
reason-
them.
For some reason, all of these corporate overlords, they all went, it seemed like socialist. They all went liberal-leaning socialist.
Ricky,
Not,
I'm gonna help you. A corporation can't be socialist. It's a
No, the
contradiction in
leadership.
terms.
The leadership.
It's a contradiction in terms.
Okay.
That's like saying you're a slave owner and you're a socialist. No, you're not. You have slaves.
yeah.
You understand why that's a contradiction?
Yeah, I do. I
A
get-
corporate like Jeff Bezos could never claim to be a socialist unless he were to disgorge his billion. If he took his $100 billion that he made this in 2020 and he gave it to the poor, then he could say he's a
Joe
socialist.
Biden is not a socialist.
Correct.
Yeah.
Janet Yellen is not a socialist.
But addressing this point though, because I asked you to voice America's anger, and with respect, I don't think you did a good job.
Let me try again.
Because I think America is angry about things that have nothing to do with the election, and you focus on
No,
Donald
the
Trump
election is
and
huge.
the election. And but since you did that,
if
let's
we don't
follow
have
up on that.
trust in the election system, we think the government's going to fail.
Would we be better off with this narcissistic lunatic as the second term president of the United States?
Anybody that fights, for the American people, I think he was fighting for us. I think
For me?
I personally think what's happening with this whole COVID thing and stuff. Anyway, back to America.
No, we can get to COVID. That's on the list. But,
Okay.
Okay.
Back to America. I don't trust the elections. What I saw, mainstream media cover up, like I said, Hunter Biden's story 10 days before the election. That to me is voter suppression
Who?
and voter manipulation.
Who voted improperly? Black folks?
So listen, when I voted this year, I didn't show ID. I went to my polling place. I said, "Do I need to provide ID?" And
No, you
I was in Agora, okay, and they said, "No, you don't have to provide ID.
You
Just
don't.
type in your name and address." I could have put any name and any address and voted for anybody else.
And do you-
That's not right.
Do you have
I also got 3 mail-in ballots to my house. 1 in my name and 2 in the previous owner's names.
how much evidence?
So there's something wrong in the
You have
election.
scholars who have investigated. We have almost no evidence of voter fraud.
We have tons of
No,
evidence, sir.
no,
we just haven't. The courts
how-
haven't seen it.
Oh,
The
so-
courts haven't exposed. The courts haven't adjudicated on it. It's
So
never been tried.
60-some suits have been dismissed.
Dismissed without seeing evidence.
So they've thrown it out. They're part of the deep state that said we don't want to deal with this.
Sir, I
The
don't.
judiciary is part of the deep state. Everybody's part of the deep state.
Sir, I don't know, but there's 75 million of us that believe something fishy went on.
And there are 80-some million who voted the other way. So I guess you want the minority to rule.
No, sir. I just want to get to the bottom of it, and I wish the Supreme Court had heard the evidence and looked at it, because if it was false, then they could have shown America that it was false.
You
Instead,
have.
now they haven't even looked at the case, and it leads us to further suspicion.
You got 6 people on the Supreme Court, I can name all 6 of them, who lean to your side, but somehow Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, John Roberts, and the rest of them, they've said, no, we don't want to do this.
I don't know why. I think
that.
that's a shirking of the responsibility of their office and their duty.
And what would have happened if they had overturned the election? Then we would.
If it was just, then we wouldn't.
And what would the 80 million, the almost 7 million people who voted the other way, what would that have left them with?
I agree. It was a bad situation both ways. If it was taken away,
They would have said,
it was a bad.
We had 7 million more people voting for Joe Biden, and the Supreme Court has overturned that. Would that have left American democracy in a better position?
No, sir. It would have been a shit show.
Can I throw another wrench
yeah.
in there? There are 27 million people in the United States who have criminal records. Now, without being racial, do you think that more than the half of those are black and brown people of those 27 million?
I don't know.
Probably, right?
Okay.
Now, if they were allowed to vote instead of being denied the right to vote because of their felony convictions, that's 27 million people. How do you think that would have fared for Donald Trump? And it's a rhetorical question in the sense that there's election manipulation all throughout the system. It's not just quote voter fraud. There's the Electoral College, there's jerry rigging and gerrymandering, and the fact that 27 million, that's almost a tenth of the population, are excluded from the ballots because they committed a felony, and a lot of these are poverty crimes. So but here's what we're going to do, because this is actually, I think, a very interesting segue, because I think it counters your point just a little bit, what I'm going to say right here. Kyle Rittenhouse was angry before the election, right?
I don't know. I can't speak to what was in his heart.
The shooting happened prior to the election.
He was angry?
Well, whatever happened, he had an AR-15 and went to a Black Lives Matter Antifa protest turned riot, to use your terms, before the election, though, is what I'm saying. This trouble has been in existence, and whites in the middle America have been angry and counter-protesting before Trump lost the election. Correct. So I need you to give voice, because now we're shifting to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse. You know about Kyle Rittenhouse. Yeah. It's all related. We know how you have supported Kyle, and people can assume, and we're going to get to how we feel about that. But you've got to tell us something other than the election that justifies or that explains that the perspective of Kyle and people like yourself who supported him before Donald Trump lost the election.
Well, the reason I supported Kyle Rittenhouse is because I believe he needs a fair trial.
He should absolutely have a fair
trial. I think he should have a fair trial.
He needs a fair trial.
Absolutely.
He needs to hear, the evidence has to be presented before a jury. It has to be done in a court of law. Sorry. And,
absolutely.
And what I saw happening with that boy is he was being, in the mainstream media, the Marxist streaming media, he was being found guilty.
It's not a Marxist media.
And so,
the people who run the press, they are not. The people who actually run. If you ask them if they've read Marx, they would look at you and say, "I have no idea."
They have no idea.
Talking about.
Do you really think that the media owners are not capitalists?
I don't think they really.
Rupert Murdoch, and I can list other people.
I don't know what's in them, but back to Kyle.
Let's deal with Kyle.
Let's deal with Kyle. So I saw a young man, 17, that could have been any one of our children, any one of our kids.
Not mine.
Okay. I don't control my kids, so I give them a free choice and free agency.
But your sons wouldn't have been out there.
There's absolutely a chance that one of my kids could have been Kyle. And so, anyway, they could have been. So what I saw was a 17-year-old boy being crucified in the press as a white supremacist and a racist. When I didn't see any evidence of that. He shot 3 white people, and he was being made to be a racist. And the patriots are being made to be racist. This is destructive Marxist streaming media propaganda. We are not racist.
Why did he have an assault weapon?
The AR-15 platform is the most popular long rifle in America.
I know that.
It's the most popular long rifle.
Why did he have it?
For self-defense.
Against whom?
There was many people that had been killed in that summer of violence in riots prior to Kyle's
approximately 20 people
participation. Died. And so he was there. I mean, he was there.
He didn't live there.
He worked in Kenosha.
He did not.
He's a lifeguard in Kenosha. So he lives right across the border. He came to Kenosha. It's a town that he works in. I think it was the third night of violence, and this is a kid that
He's self-appointed protector.
he was asked to go to defend a business and get paid a little bit of money and to help out this car dealership, body shop area. And so he went there with his sister's boyfriend, the two of them. They're both kids. And that was their intention, was to defend that business. But that changed.
Should you really entrust that kind of a weapon to a 17-year-old? I have 19 and 20-year-olds as my students. I must say that not all of them exhibit the highest levels of maturity that I would like to see.
Correct.
They're not.
Correct.
They're not.
Most people can't handle a weapon like that.
Yeah, and if they're
Correct.
not particularly mature at 20 and 21, I really wonder about 17-year-old. My daughter's now grown up. When she was 17,
Yeah.
I really wondered about her level of maturity, and I had good reason to wonder about her level of
Well,
maturity.
everybody's different for sure, but from my experience, from what I've seen, Kyle acted in self-defense.
Against whom? What
Three
are they
attack.
doing to him?
He was. Oh, we haven't seen the video, sir.
No,
So
I haven't.
It's not fair for us to really discuss it
No,
unless
we
you've
can
seen the
discuss
videos.
it. I mean, Kyle was running from an unarmed man, and an unarmed man was chasing him.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so I'm not.
But there was a gunshot from behind.
That's true. Fair enough.
There was a man chasing him, an adult male, and he's 17. And then a gunshot rang out from behind Kyle. So if you were getting chased running for your life, which he was, I think it's a fair assumption you might think the person behind you just shot at you. If it came from behind you, you can't tell.
Maybe. Can I ask you something though? Does it matter why Kyle was running? Because we don't see the whole video of the night. We see him running and then killing people. Does it matter why he's running?
Well, absolutely, because if it's not self-defense, then it's not self-defense.
So if he fired his weapon before that time we saw in video, does that change your opinion? In other words, if he fired the
it
weapon and
depends.
they were chasing him because they felt he should be disarmed for having fired
That would
weapon.
absolutely, if he provoked that chase in some way by shooting at somebody, that changes everything. But
Okay,
but
cool.
that's why we're going to have a trial,
We'll
and
have
the
a trial.
evidence will come out.
Yeah, let it. I mean, I assume he's going to be tried. I
He
assume
is.
there'll be a jury. I assume that there'll be a fair jury. I
Yes,
assume he's well represented by.
he has a great
counsel.
young attorney.
Good.
Not young, sorry, great attorney.
Good.
So that's
I
that's
assume the Kenosha prosecutor will be well prepared.
yes,
to
sir.
See how it sorts out. I'm fine with that.
We have to abide by the court's decisions, the jury's decisions. That's our system. That's our process.
Well, but not on the election. Okay, we're changing the subject.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Got me, zinger.
He's up. I don't even. I haven't followed it with a level of precision because.
Yeah.
I
Let the
followed
jury decide. They hear the
it.
evidence.
Fine.
Just like in the, have you been watching the George Floyd thing?
I've been watching it
seen clips
closely.
of it.
I've seen a little bit
We're
here
going
and
to talk
there.
about that next. But before
Okay.
we get to that, is there a precedent or a history of white men not receiving fair trials in the United States that forced you out into the streets to help Kyle? Are you really concerned
I
that
would've-
Kyle is not? Now,
I
leaving
would have
aside your point
bailed him
about
out
the
if he was a
media-
black kid. I swear to you.
leaving aside the media point, because we know the media can try people unfairly. But do you really think that Kyle is not going to get a fair trial in America?
I think Kyle's going to get a fair trial. I think
Good.
he's going
Why
to
is
get.
that- So
I think
okay.
he's going to get a fair
So
trial.
do you think that the bail system is a problem? The
I don't know
that-
anything about the bail
Well,
system.
but the bail system means that rich people can be out with their friends,
I know the bail system.
while poor
is
people
wrong.
have to wait in jail for trial because they don't have money to bail themselves out.
There are large numbers of people right here in LA, not just a few miles from where we're now
Yeah.
sitting, who are incarcerated in the LA County Jail because they cannot afford bail, and a disproportionate number of those people are men and women of color,
Mhm.
and the bail is not that even excessive.
Right, but they still can't afford it.
$4,000 or $5,000, and even to pay a bondsman at 10%,
Mhm.
you can't do it.
Well,
And
So
the
we're
tragedy,
saying-
if I can add, is that you know what they end up doing? is they take pleas
They
to get out of
plead.
jail
Well, it's
before
just-
trial.
They plead
That's not
out
right.
because that's the
Right.
only
Especially
way
if they're
they can
innocent.
get out.
Especially if they're innocent.
They may be innocent and they plead out because that's the only way they can get out of jail.
Paul, are you comfortable talking about your jail experience so that I can compare that to what some other people might have to face when they're thinking about whether they want to stay in the lockup?
Well, I had a
to
pretty
fight
bad
trial?
jail. I've had a couple of bad
Let's briefly
jails.
talk about your experience, because what can happen to you while you're in jail? And why would someone who is innocent take a plea that gives them no time and a strike felony conviction just to get out of the lockup?
I know, man. I had a horrible time in jail, but I had a bail bondsman. It was a movement jail bondsman. It took 7 or 8 hours for me to get out of jail when I was arrested in San Diego. But the police officers made it uncomfortable for me because they didn't like civil rights demonstrators. So they were going to show that white boy. They put me first in a drunk tank. And I saw these poor old men, they were probably in their 40s or their 50s, but they looked old to me, and they were vomiting all over the place. And then they put me in with a group of, they were aggressive homosexuals, but they started molesting me. Not bad, I mean, I wasn't raped. They grabbed my crotch, they grabbed my butt. And they were doing that under the instructions of the police. You know, they were going to show me. And it wasn't horrible, but it was uncomfortable.
You can't just label police. I've learned this. It's individual people
No, I
that
know,
make
but,
those decisions.
But they were done
to
under
mess with you.
under the
It's not-
directions of the individual police who told them.
It's poor leadership. It's poor. It's not. It's like.
No, I
It's
understand
like you
that.
can't smear the army. You can't smear
I
organizations.
understand that, but it was those
people.
individual police.
Yeah.
And then I was in a cell for, I don't remember how long, but I was just waiting for the bondsman to get me the hell out of there.
Yeah.
And when I had the subsequent trial for the misdemeanor offenses, one of the prosecution witnesses was my cellmate. He was an undercover police officer for the San Diego police, and he just lied. I'm not making this up.
He was in there as a
And
to
he
get
made up-
information.
Yeah,
You do
he
that all
got
the time.
information. He just lied.
Okay.
I mean, I don't lie. I mean,
Can you look
even
up the
my-
term for police officers that pretend to be inmates in
Perps.
jail? There's a term for
It
that.
happens.
To get information. It's commonly done.
It's common. I mean, he just lied. He said stuff.
So he
that I-
gathered intel.
yeah,
and then
but
used it against you in
made
the trial.
stuff up. I didn't say it.
Right.
But, I
Right.
mean, you've been my student. I don't lie.
Right.
I mean, I say.
Not about this. You would lie
I,
about it.
I don't.
You stand for your convictions.
I mean, not about anything, but I think nobody lies about stuff like this.
No, I mean.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so now,
it was and people in jail. I mean, I've talked to them. They pleaded that guilty to stuff they didn't do just so they could get out of jail, and it's largely people of color. It's a bad situation. Now I don't know the Rittenhouse case.
Yeah.
so well.
Yes, sir.
I do want them to get a
Fair
fair
trial.
trial.
of course, this is America.
I believe in fair trials. I have been watching the George Floyd.
Well, let's get to that, but I want to just say one thing
Yes.
to Ricky, if I could, because I think, are you being fair when you say that we can't paint the military with a broad brush and we can't paint the police with a broad brush? We have to look at the individual officers. Are you applying that same standard to Black Lives Matter and Antifa and Black people in the community
Yes.
generally?
Yes.
Like, it's not, you can't paint
You
Black
can't
Lives
paint
Matter
an entire organization or
Or
group of people in any
Antifa.
way
or even the January 6th protesters. Very
unless
good.
it's their written policy.
And I'd like to. Fair enough, but even
Okay.
written policies, like, are we all Americans tied
Yeah.
to what the Constitution said? But okay, fair enough. Here's the thing that I like to do. I like to bridge the gap and see where we can find middle ground. We didn't really find middle ground on Antifa and January 6th protesters.
Well, I'm no fan of Antifa.
That's okay, but here's an idea, and I know this is, both of you might resist this a little bit, but I think that's what makes it a compromise. Would you be willing to say free Kyle Rittenhouse pending trial because he shouldn't have been held on bond?
Well, I don't know if it's murder one.
He's not a flight risk. He's not going anywhere. Would
No,
you be? Would
It's
you
not
say
murder one.
free?
Is murder one premeditated?
That's right. It's not murder one.
Yeah,
It's-
all right,
it's
if
murder
it's not,
two.
if it's not premeditated,
It's
I
not.
find a free and one bail.
Free Kyle Rittenhouse says leftist socialist Paul von Blum pending a fair trial, and I support that. Free every American unless they're a threat to society
Yeah, I'm
pending a
fine. There
fair
are people
trial.
who shouldn't be freed.
They're a threat to society.
Yeah, but in general, I'm in favor of freeing people before trial. There are a couple of very dangerous people who really shouldn't be freed. There's some of the people on the January 6th thing who shouldn't be freed.
I'm sure, sir. I don't know them all.
Yeah, I don't know them either.
I don't know.
But to reach middle ground, Ricky had already said this, so I'm just going to rewind. If Kyle instigated that altercation, he's guilty of some kind of killing.
Correct.
Killing.
If he provoked it,
Instigated,
instigated it.
What I understand is
That changes the whole dynamic.
What I understand is he fired his weapon at someone that he thought was an arsonist. And that's what triggered the people chasing him, saying, "You better not fire that gun. I'm going to take it from you." And then he killed them for trying to take his weapon.
I just don't know.
I don't know
I'm
the
willing
facts.
to see what
The facts come out.
How they come out with the facts. I just don't know, Harold. I didn't follow
And that's
it.
that's the beauty, is that's where we can find middle ground.
Yeah,
is
I
we
don't
don't
know.
know what
I'm
all the
willing-
facts and what happened. Right?
I'm willing to see where the facts come out.
Yes.
We're gonna watch that trial too. So
I'm
now let's
gonna
talk
watch
about
it. Yeah.
let's talk about George Floyd. Who wants to go first? Go
I
ahead.
mean, I'm watching it. Well,
Have you been following it?
I've watched clips.
Yeah, I
Same
watch
here.
clips. So I try to watch it in between.
The last thing I saw was that he died as a result of the
Asphyxiation.
asphyxiation and loss of oxygen, not the fentanyl.
I-
That's the last thing the expert. Of course,
I believe it.
the defense hasn't gone yet, but that's what the
I believe
prosecution
it
has.
was. I think it's fairly clear and unambiguous. I think he was murdered.
I wasn't there. I don't
We have
want
a video.
I
have
don't
to
even
be
want to
there.
talk about it as far as, because I'm not in the jury.
You know,
I'm not seeing the evidence. So it's so
Can I
so
ask you
destructive for all of us to sit here and pontificate
Maybe.
about
Can I ask you
stuff.
a
I
point?
will pontificate.
Can I ask you in a
Nuts.
pointed way? If that was a video of your son on the ground with the officer's knee, and you saw the exact same video.
It looks horrible.
But fair enough.
It looks terrible.
Would you want that cop to be punished?
It looks terrible. Listen, from the first blush, it's offensive, it's insulting, it's horrible. I don't know the facts regarding his medical conditions. I don't know the facts regarding his heart. I'm not in the jury. What I would say is on first blush, it looks like he should be found guilty. On first blush. From what I saw initially, it looks like he should be found guilty. That being said, I haven't seen and listened to all the testimony of these experts, and so I can't say anything more than that, because I don't.
So can I just to press on that? You think that an expert can convince you that a handcuffed, prone man should be kneeled upon on the neck?
So listen, that's the thing that I saw last. So that's why I'm holding back. Is they had this whole thing about different camera angles. The last thing I saw on the trial was
His knee wasn't.
the knee was moving from the back shoulder to the neck to the back shoulder, and so I don't know how long it was on the neck. I don't know if the angle from the people filming it created a camera thing. I don't know if his camera shows a different perspective. I'm not there listening to everything, so I don't know if the knee was on the neck for 9 minutes. I don't know if it was on the back for 5 and the knee and the neck for 4. I don't know.
Even 1 minute is outrageous.
It looks outrageous
He
to
was
me, sir.
handcuffed and laid
I
prone on
agree.
the ground.
Look, I don't paint the police with a broad brush. There are a lot of really good police officers.
Yes, sir.
Some of my students have become police officers. They obey the Constitution.
Yes.
They're very good. There's some very bad police
Yes, sir.
officers. I've been the victim of them.
Yes, sir.
These 2 teeth are not real.
Mhm.
We have really good dentistry in America. I got them knocked out in Phoenix, Arizona, when a police officer took me behind a car and punched me straight on in the face.
I'm sorry.
He was a bad police officer.
It's right.
I've seen people who've been beaten up. There's some really good ones. Derek Chauvin is a bad one.
It looks pretty bad, man.
Bad one. There are some bad ones.
And the ones around it that watched it happen too. I mean,
I saw that that older, and I heard the testimony of the young woman who took she took the video. Look, there's some bad police officers, and some of them are so bad that they kill people. It happens. I mean, I hope the jury convicts. I have predictions. My prediction is that they're going to come up with a guilty verdict and a lesser charge.
Let me ask you, sir, if they don't convict, if they found him innocent for whatever reasons,
This country will explode.
is that appropriate response?
Yes.
An appropriate response is for this country to explode and burn. I don't think so.
Burn, I don't say burn, I think it will explode.
What does that mean,
I
sir?
don't know.
Okay.
People out in the streets without
People out
violence.
on the streets.
You're saying people should get in the
Big
streets,
time.
but they shouldn't use violence.
Big time. Yeah, I'm not violent. I was out in the
Yeah.
streets a lot. I didn't see any violence, Ricky. I was out, I don't know how many times.
Interject something or
If you have a
ask
question,
a
go
question to you guys. What do you think about, because they, the situation, that was not their first meeting. They knew each other. They
Mr.
worked at the same.
I don't know that.
They
Yeah, I
worked
don't
as
either.
security guards at the same.
They had a
nightclub.
history?
That's
Yes.
what I heard. That's never
Yeah,
been
he worked at the same
confirmed to
club,
me.
is what I've heard as well.
I've heard that as
But
well.
is that
but
rumor or is that fact?
Well,
Is
I'm
that,
looking at it on CBS.
has that been
News.
brought out in the trial?
I
Not
don't know
yet.
if it's been brought out in the trial, but
I don't-
it is, as far as I'm aware.
Well,
fact.
CBS News you can't trust. Look what they just did to Ron DeSantis
Also,
with the 60-minute interview.
Also, if George was, Mr. Floyd was a known pornographer. He was a pornographic film actor, and so, and I know you say that doesn't matter, and it shouldn't. But I want to introduce another concept since we're talking about it, since you brought that up. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing has a theory that the reason why there's so much animosity from whites towards blacks is because of a fear of genetic annihilation, and that because she's using Barack Obama as an example. She says, I might ask you, what is Barack Obama, black or white? We already talked about this. Barack Obama is black, let's say, right? Most people would say that, right? Yet he has a white mother and a black father.
Mhm.
So if black plus white equals black,
Mhm.
this to the subconscious mind suggests that the black male sexuality to some extent is a threat to white male identity. This is called the Cress theory of color concentration by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and she said this is why during lynchings, for example, black men, white on black violence is the only incidence where you see widespread mutilation of the genitals. I don't know if you know that during lynchings,
They used to cut off genitals.
they would always,
It was
they would very
a trophy.
commonly cut off the genitals. I don't know if any of you know who I'm sure you know who George Washington Carver is. If you probably may not have heard of George Washington Carver, he is one who is not as credited as someone like Nikola Tesla, but he's like a Nikola Tesla. He was a contemporary.
Yeah.
Ford knew both of them. Nikola Tesla introduced electric cars before there were gas-powered cars, and Carver introduced bodies for vehicles that were made of soy-based plastics before there were steel cars, and it was the steel industry that silenced Carver. And by the way, the manufacturing plant is named by George Washington Carver because he was a botanist, and he said that you need to develop your manufacturing the way that a plant provides resources to its leaves, and that's how he invented the manufacturing plant, a black man. One thing that you should know about George Washington Carver is George Washington Carver was adopted by a white family, and if you ever hear his voice, he speaks with a very high-pitched tone. The reason is because they had a white daughter, and to make sure that there were no problems, they castrated him at the age of 12. So this is something. So again, what I'm saying here is that what Dr. Welsing says is that there's a difference between what we think of as tribalism and the tribes going at each other. Racism isn't that. There's a difference between black on white crime and black on white bigotry and violence. And this is where we get into identity. And both of you are ostensibly white. So I want to know how you feel about the idea that white racism, specifically the feeling that whites have against other group, is unique because whites are uniquely, because of their genetic recessiveness. You know, we know that blue eyes are genetically recessive, right? If you have a couple with blue eyes and then brown eyes, both white, the child would be more likely to have brown eyes and less likely to have blue eyes because blue eyes is a recessive trait. Whiteness is also a recessive trait. That's why Barack Obama appears to be black, even though he has a white parent and a black parent. This is genetics. It has nothing to do with race. And so what is the argument is that whiteness as an identity, these aren't Welsing's words, these are my words trying to paraphrase her. Whiteness is itself pathological because it sets up an identity around a recessive trait that is necessarily puts you in threat.
It's whites have been threatened, and black sexuality has been feared. That's the reason for a whole lot of lynchings in the South. I mean, and the threat of black males has been there that underlies so much of the lynching, the Scottsboro case, a lot of the thing, and it lingers. That's why people like Rodney King, big black men have always been feared.
I mean, is that why George Floyd was killed?
George Floyd, it's the same thing. I mean, he's a big black man. Even unconsciously, it's been major fear in the white population. Even when it's not consciously articulated, it's always been there. The white race, you're right, I mean, it's a recessive trait, so it's always been a fearful thing. It's lingered as part of American history for centuries.
Can I press on that question a little bit more? And I know
Sure.
this is, I'm not advocating this point, this is devil's advocate. And I appreciate that you don't identify as white, but my question could whiteness be itself pathological?
No, I don't think it's pathological, just what it is. There are a lot of whites who are threatened by it. I'm obviously not, although I told you I don't.
Let me explain more why I say it could be. If two people, let's say a white couple, their children get married and have kids, and their children get married and have kids, and if they're not white, there's no challenge to whoever they marry to because they're still part of that same tribe. That's what a tribe is.
Right.
But Prince Philip died today. I happened to look up and see that Prince Philip is related to his wife, Elizabeth. They both have the same grandparent, and this is because the great grandparent was I forget his name. You can look that up if you want to fact check that. Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth are married and they are related.
Yeah,
and this is something that's
inbreeding.
That's commonly done, and it's done by whites because they know that it's a recessive trait, and that if they bring in other genetic material, it will dilute their genes. This is why, and so what I'm saying is that
they are both great grandchildren of Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria, that's right. They're both related to Queen Victoria now. And so what I'm saying is that to press this point about the pathology, other groups can have children and say, oh, I want my children to be alive and I want them to thrive, and that's normal. But whites, that's not sufficient. They don't just want their children to exist, they want them to maintain their whiteness. And I'm arguing that is pathological, because whiteness isn't a thing, first of all, that should have that character. It's like if you wanted all your children to have blue eyes. That's not a real identity that...
Let me talk about a dad. I got daughters. I just want good men in their lives. I just want good men that will treat them well and respect them and not talk down to them.
Makes sense.
I don't care what they look like.
You don't care
because they come good and bad in all colors.
No, I don't either.
And so I got two daughters, and literally I have no issue with who they choose to marry. My one daughter is about to engage a young man, dark complexion from Ecuador. And so I have no issue with...
Me either.
Yeah. So I think we're talking about this race stuff so much.
No, Harold.
No, I hear that, but are you saying that that's how you feel most whites are? Like most white men, do you think they don't care if they're...
No, I think most whites are... I
haven't done a survey.
My experience is that most whites would be very...
Hold on. Also, listen, I've heard a lot of black mamas say to their sons, go find a black girl tonight when we went out on dates. They didn't want their mamas to... Mamas didn't want their sons to find white girls.
Probably.
I've heard a lot of that from black mamas.
What I'll just say about that is, again, this is one of the points that I'm trying to make. Like if you go to, let's say, Africa, and you see there's a tribe, there's the Igbo and the Hausa. The Hausa might tell the Hausa, you don't want to marry Igbo, you need to marry a Hausa, someone from your tribe. But that is different. You see what I'm saying? Than saying that you need to be with someone to maintain a certain identity that is genetically recessive. They didn't say you need to be black. They didn't care about the race.
That's probably true, but they're not aware of that because they have no idea about the genetic basis of that. I think probably most white families probably prefer that they continue with their white lineage.
But they do know about the genetic basis because they know that if their daughter marries a black man, their child is going to be black.
Right.
That's the genetic. That's all they need to know.
Yeah, they know that and they don't want it.
I don't necessarily think folks are necessarily afraid of the skin color. I think they're afraid with what comes with the hip hop culture. Yeah. Let's say, like I wouldn't want my daughters to marry a hip hop culture.
This goes back way before hip hop.
But one of this men's sons, I'd have no problem my daughter marrying. So it depends on the traditions and of the people that matter to me.
Yeah, I know, but it goes so far before that. I mean, white people would fear that. They would not.
But you're talking in the past. We're talking now. Like, there's a lot of...
They would not want... they don't know. I mean, a lot of white folks have no idea about hip-hop. They don't know hip hop. They say.
What do you mean? It's pervaded the whole.
Yeah, I know, but they don't know.
The
what
whole
it is.
that
They-
whole
they-
bitches and hoes
most- my-
culture, when they
most white
speak
folks.
like this about women, is what people have an issue with,
Yeah, they vaguely
and
heard it.
perhaps why they wouldn't want their daughters to date somebody from that side of the culture, not
Probably
because they're
not.
skin culture,
Yeah,
skin color,
No, it's
because of the
deeper.
no.
It's deeper. They don't
don't-
care about hip hop. They don't want to see black.
Listen, you have daughters, right?
One.
Okay, don't you want her just to marry any good man?
Yeah.
Any good man?
Yeah, she
Doesn't
made a
matter,
mistake.
right?
Gonna get a divorce.
So-
That's good. I like the guy, but.
So let me ask you a story. Let me ask you a question. In Charleston, remember that Dylan Clyburn, was that his name? That murdered all those
Dylan
people?
Roof.
Dylan Roof, sorry.
Yeah.
He murdered all those
Monster.
folks. Is it Saint Emmanuel? Saint Ezekiel?
Mother Emmanuel.
Mother Emmanuel.
Yeah. Monster.
Okay, so I know a lady lives in Charleston her whole life, and great woman, and not her whole life, but she lives there for a long time. And she told me a story about how when he did that, he murdered those people in that church.
9 of them.
Antifa came in, BLM came in, and they wanted to burn Charleston. And let me just finish. And the good people of Charleston, the Christian community, and the Christian white and the Christian black community, they actually pushed Antifa and BLM out of their city, and they held hands across that giant bridge that goes across the.
BLM did not want to burn Charleston.
Well, that's what I was told by somebody who lives there. Is that
But
they,
how
they
would they
showed
know?
they showed
how
up.
did they know that the BLM was going to burn? Did
What they
come with
took
torches like
no
like the
what
ticket
happened
burn?
was these activists that come in that want to keep. He talks about these.
Why would they want to burn Charleston?
They live in Charleston.
So anyway, there's people that make their livings based on racial conflict,
There's no
right?
thing in the
And
world
he talks about it.
Black Lives Matter would want to burn Charleston.
Well, what I was told was that the activists showed up, and the families of the 9 that were killed gathered together, and those families of the 9 that were killed said, "We don't want this to happen in our city. This is our town. This is our place, and we don't need you here, and we don't want you here." And the love that was then drove out the violence.
Now, are you sure?
I
that-
would find I find that
Fake. She told me
Sure.
it.
Well, let me ask you: are you sure that if they knew in their hearts that Black Lives Matter and Antifa were just coming to protest and wave signs and make a bunch of noise, that they still wouldn't feel exactly the same way and say, "You don't belong in our town. We don't want that here. Get the hell out of here."
No, I think they'd be fine with that. I think it's the violence. Charleston
Why did
survived.
they hold down the
Charleston
black-
survived the Civil War. They didn't want it burned because of a maniac white supremacist who did a horrible crime. How can you hold the people
they
accountable?
wouldn't.
They weren't.
How can you hold the shop owners accountable?
They were
How
not
can you
coming to
hold?
burn the shops.
No.
Let me ask you a question. Why did they sick dogs on the protesters in the 60s and have put fire hoses on them? We know they were singing "We Shall Overcome" and marching down the streets.
Yeah, I've been on the wrong side of the kind of police violence. I mean, I wasn't
Right.
wasn't bitten. I wasn't, but I've been Billy Club.
What I could say though is the people of Charleston, because that didn't happen in their city after Dylan Roof, I think they came together as opposed to further apart.
They should.
And I think they're closer today because of it, as opposed to other.
And Dylan Roof
responses.
belongs in prison for the rest of his life. He's
Yeah.
not-
He got the death penalty.
he shouldn't get. Nobody should get
Right,
the death
and I agree with you. I mean, I believe in human rights. I think the death penalty should be abolished. Now, but let me ask you this question. You mentioned another incident where you were actually there. I hope I'm not saying too much, but there was a conflict between the Proud Boys and Black Lives Matter, or Antifa.
Antifa.
And were Antifa coming to burn the city down in that incident as well?
Well, in that
And
situation,
you see my
do you want
question.
me to-
You see,
okay.
my question is basic: is that they didn't want him there anyway, and there was no implication that Antifa was going to burn the city down. They just don't like them.
You meant in Washington,
want to
D.C.?
stand against
That
them.
conflict?
You were there, not me.
It was
but
Washington.
Tell me, yes.
It was a group of Proud Boys that had caught a group of Antifa and,
Like you catch slaves.
and surrounded them. It was all whites. It's the group.
But
So-
you said they caught him like they were running.
They were
with slaves
surrounded
or
them,
something.
and the police surrounded Antifa to protect them from the Proud Boys, because the Proud Boys were looking for blood.
So, but it wasn't
and-
because. But the point I'm making, it wasn't because Antifa was about to burn down any shops. It's because there is another side who hates the idea that these people are not loving them. They're in the best country.
But
in
the
the
bottom
world,
line is the Proud
and they're
Boys
so
didn't
privileged,
attack
and how
them.
dare they be out? They were going to attack them if the police weren't there, right?
They backed off from the police. They didn't. But once the police showed, the Proud Boys did not get violent towards them.
But the point is that they were going.
Not that I'm a Proud Boy.
Had the police not been there, they were going to engage Antifa.
Yes,
it
they were going to beat the shit out of them.
It wasn't Antifa that wanted to engage the Proud Boys. It was the Proud
Well,
Boys
just because
that
they had
wanted to
numbers.
engage Antifa.
Just because it was all about numbers at that point. If Antifa had more numbers, they would have engaged the Proud Boys.
I don't think that's true.
I've known people who've been on the streets my whole life. I don't know anybody who is in any way sympathetic to the small group of lunatics calling themselves Antifa. I mentioned earlier, I was on so many protests. I didn't see anybody burning or vandalizing. The only time I actually saw that was in Long Beach, and I was on there all day on the protest. The people who came in and burned the buildings in Long Beach, and the people who looted, they were professional criminals. I'm not a criminal.
It's
I
true.
don't like looting. I don't like burning. The people who were there, they knew that there would be chaos, and they came in and they burned down buildings. I told one of my colleagues at UCLA, one of my fellow professors, I said, look, you can see I'm going to be the only 70-year-old who loots Forever 21. And I'm going to wear a pair of sneakers. You can put me on the front page of the LA Times. 70-year-old professor steals sneakers from Forever 21. I don't believe in looting. I don't believe in violence. I've never done that.
All right.
When I was beaten up once in New Orleans by two thugs that could today have been Proud Boys, I stood there, I got beaten up, and two New Orleans cops came up. My students love this story. And I got off. I didn't fight back because we knew. And the two New Orleans cops came up to the two white thugs who beat me up, and they said, "Were you hurt? You want to press charges against me?" So I mean, I've seen this kind of stuff, and we were trained in nonviolence. We knew how not to respond, even though every instinct in my body said, "Kill the bastards." So I don't.
Martin Luther King, right? I mean, are you a fan of his?
Yeah. I would
Was he
never do
peaceful?
that. It was peaceful. I mean, I never met King, although I was at the March on Washington when I heard his speech.
Mm-hmm.
So look, you can't paint those of us on the street with that kind of brush either.
Right.
We wouldn't do that. I'm a good example of somebody who's a democratic socialist, who's on the streets doing that. Not violent. I don't burn stuff down. You know, Harold, I'm going to have to go relatively soon because I'm involved in a project to try to get a mural of Rayford Johnson, whom I knew.
Who's that?
Rayford Johnson was a great UCLA athlete, and I knew him.
So do you have 15 minutes?
Yeah, I have another 15
Okay, so
minutes.
let's wrap up.
I'm trying to get a mural
Painted of him.
by Kent Twitchell, so we want to try to.
15 minutes.
250, I think.
Yeah, it's a project I really believe in, to get a mural of Reef for a great athlete, wonderful humanitarian. He was the one who carried the torch in the '84 Olympics.
Okay, quickly, I wanted to bring up a point that I heard you guys discussing earlier, and I want to say, we were talking about cancel culture, and both of you guys can quickly comment after I say this.
Yeah, sure.
Noam Chomsky says this, and I address you because I know I'm more on the other side of this issue. He says that cancel culture is nothing new. He says when he was protesting against the war, or giving talks against the war in the 60s and the 70s, he said they would have to have police protection because the conservatives would come and shut them down. He says that like the 70s activism, like the whole idea of them being against the war, that was a new thing in the 70s. Prior to that, if you tried to protest against the war, you'd get acid thrown on you and people would beat you up and things like that, right? So he's saying that cancel culture is something that the establishment has always done to people who got out of line. Like you could list people, like you can go back to Minister Farrakhan, you could talk about Norman Finkelstein, you could talk about so many people who got fired and canceled by the establishment, usually the white power establishment. So now they're kind of just whining about cancel culture because who can poor people really cancel? These corporations who are now so-called canceling conservatives, these are the same ones that were canceling leftists a while ago. So the power still lies in the same hands. And so to say that to you on the one hand, and then also to say to you, isn't that also a reason why people are distrustful of the media and the government and corporate power? So whoever wants to address cancel culture.
I don't want anybody to be canceled. If you have trouble getting jobs, that's wrong.
Yeah.
No conservative who has talent should be canceled from anything.
Well, I'm canceled. So,
That's wrong.
okay.
Look, I talk about actors who are conservative. I'm no fan of John Voight.
Mhm.
I think his politics are ridiculous, totally ridiculous. But I watched him in what's that wonderful series of the private detective.
Oh yeah, he was the fixer.
Yeah, the Fixer.
Yeah.
Mickey. Whatever the hell.
That series.
Yeah,
He's great in it.
He's an incredible actor.
Right.
I think he should have won an Emmy. I think talent should be rewarded and not canceled, regardless of one's politics. I can reward somebody's acting and I wouldn't cancel them. I tell my students, you can be totally in opposition to anything I say. You can win. You can get an A.
Yeah.
You can do well and agree with me. You can not. You can disagree with me and get an A.
Right.
You can also agree with me and do poorly because you write bad paper.
Right, and you don't think for yourself.
And we have to value your time.
And
So I have a couple more issues. Let's let Ricky respond.
So I don't believe that anybody should be censored. But I was censored when I first started teaching because of my leftist views. So I don't believe in any cancel culture. And taking Confederate flags down is not cancel culture.
Your thoughts quickly, so we can.
But you can fly one in my neighborhood if you want.
Cancel culture.
Because that's First Amendment.
Yeah.
You'd be an asshole to do it, but you can do it.
Well, I just wanted to share a story about my industry.
Okay.
So so I've recently completed a screenplay about 9 guys that died in 2008 in Afghanistan, and the new guidelines for the Best Picture category in the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences require certain skin colors and sexual orientations and story themes to be eligible for Best Picture category. So my story, their story, about these 9 guys that died in 2008 fighting for our country, their story is not eligible for the best award in our land, the highest award in our land, the Best Picture category. The new guidelines have gone so far that Saving Private Ryan wouldn't even be eligible to be nominated now for Best Picture because it doesn't have the LGBTQ and color and minority and sex issues they want. Do you think that's right and fair?
I think we need affirmative action. And I think the reason we have to have that is because so many categories of people have been excluded. Sometimes it's balanced the wrong way.
Because we're talking about art here.
No,
This is art.
I understand.
When they start controlling how you make art, what you can paint.
No, I think
what
you
can write.
have to have inclusion.
They're not excluded.
No, I've been in situations where it's been.
We're excluded.
It's been
People are-
I think that sometimes the categories have gone
Too
further
far.
than perhaps they ought to. But I do believe that including women, including people from the LGBT community,
Yeah.
including
We don't
people-
want to exclude them, sir.
No, but I think we have to include.
We've
them
excluded
much
the
more.
U.S. Army now.
No, I think we have to have much more inclusion. How far that goes, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I know, for example, that a couple of years ago when they had the movement Oscars So White, that was right. That were too white. How far you go, I don't know, because that's not an area.
It's a
that's
pendulum, though.
studied,
Yeah.
so extensively. Nobody should be excluded, but people must be included. So how that balance is drawn, I just don't know.
Right.
And I don't want to pontificate on an
Yes,
area
sir.
that I don't know.
Yes, sir.
without
I respect that.
expertise.
And we want to move
Thank
forward,
you for
but
answering.
I'll take the privilege of just saying one thing. I think the problem is that the process is undemocratic. Why should the Academy be the greatest honor that a film receives? It's not democratic. It's a bunch of rich old white guys. Let's face it, even if they're not all white and rich.
It has
They're
been.
basically the same group deciding and telling you what the best picture is, and that's where the problem is. And it's the same problem with Trump. And this is me saying this
Yeah.
to you. I don't want to pick on you, Ricky.
Exactly.
But the problem with you complaining about election fraud is that the election has been a fraud since the Electoral College was invented. The problem with you complaining about the Academy excluding you is that you didn't complain when they excluded everybody else for all the time, because they always will have the power to exclude as long as the process isn't democratic. Democratic meaning the people decide who the best film is, not the gatekeepers, not the Academy, and not these big production.
Well, just so you know, it's the members of the Academy that vote for Best Picture. It's like 3,000, 4,000 members. Yeah, just
that's not
they
democratic.
decide. Yeah, it's not.
That's
right.
Republican.
Right.
So, and they don't represent us per se. They represent a particular viewpoint, and that's why. And again, that's why I think it's because ordinarily the point that you're making is correct. There's an unfairness to excluding based on arbitrary factors.
Right.
Yes, but when you look at it in context and you see that it's fundamentally unfair, and the unfairness has skewed in your favor, because don't tell me that the military has been systematically excluded from films.
Right.
You know, they are overrepresented in films. Going back to all the great films that you can think of, they were bankrolled literally by the government to say, do this World War II film, do this Vietnam film. You know this. Oliver Stone can talk about that, right? He talks about how he was given money to do these war films because the government wanted. This government probably
CIA behind that?
Not to say CIA, but it's not even a covert black op. It's right there in front of you. Like, do war films because we need people to sign up for the military.
Got it.
Like, so anyways, that's one. But so let's move on to the next topic, and I'm going to tell you guys where we're going because I wanted to cover this. So we're going to try to package it in. I know you have to go. I want to talk about. This is where because I've challenged Ricky on some things, so I want to challenge you on this one. I think you've been less than. Let me see. What am I trying to say? I think you have to be more honest and fair about the legitimate reasons that not only Black Americans but even Middle Americans have reasons to distrust the government, to distrust the scientific medical establishment, and distrust the media.
What's wrong with medical establishment?
The same thing that's wrong with the government, and the same thing that's wrong with the media.
What are they covering up?
Well, what we're going to get to, what we're about to talk about next, is we're going to talk about COVID, the pandemic, vaccinations. But I want to talk about it. I want to make it clear what my perspective is, which is that I'm not saying I know which way is the right and which way is the wrong, but I'm saying that from your side, which I know we're pro-vax and we're anti-vax, we'll just disclose that over here. But from my side is saying that we need to be fair to both sides. People who are against vaccines are not against inoculation in science. They do not trust the government and they do not trust scientists.
Yeah, really quick. I had all my kids got vaccinated to go to school. I had 4 children, and my ex-wife, she didn't want to vaccinate them, and I forced it because I thought it was the right thing because the doctor said it was the right thing. So I pushed it. So all my kids got vaccinated. So I never had this opinion about vaccines being potentially dangerous in my life, ever in my life. So, but what I wanted to get to really quick, sir, is because you're a very smart man. So, Mr. Gates, who's involved very much with the vaccine issue, Mr. Gates believes in population reduction and carbon reduction. It's a stated goal of his. So what I'm not quite clear on is why we need a vaccination to, if that's his stated goal, less people, less carbon, to increase the world's population. I don't see it in harmony.
He's not trying to reduce the population by having us get vaccinated. We're trying everything we can to reduce illness and death. There's nothing wrong with it. This is, I give the one thing I will give the Trump administration credit for. It's the only thing is that they did put money into getting the vaccinations done. I mean, after he did that, then he said, "To hell with it," and he didn't do anything else. And he started dumping on Dr. Fauci and the like.
So do you understand that we think they're trying to make a new world?
No, they're not trying to
medicine?
make a new world. They're trying to give us, they're trying to do something about the inevitable pandemics that we've had throughout history. We all must get vaccinated. I start every single class by saying, soon you're going to be eligible. April 15th, I think.
19th.
Is it
Depends on the
19th?
county.
Okay.
15th for
15th, am I right?
for San Bernardino County.
Okay, well then I want my students to get vaccinated. I want everybody to get vaccinated. It is absurd to deny that. It's just absurd.
But should we
If
allow
we're gonna
people
put
to have the choice?
I think we should make it mandatory.
Mandatory.
Absolutely.
That's medical tyranny.
No, absolutely. Lots of things are mandatory. This should be mandatory.
How about ID for voting? Should that be mandatory?
No.
Okay.
This should
let
be,
me ask
no,
you-
we don't make everything mandatory.
Okay.
We are selective in what we make mandatory.
What happens to people who don't take the vaccine if you mandate it?
We don't allow them to go to school.
So you don't
Do
you
all
don't,
kinds
you
of
don't
things.
imprison them.
Absolutely. I believe in government. I believe in laws. I believe that people on motorcycles have to wear helmets. I believe in those kinds of things. We need to do things that protect the public health. Absolutely, it should be mandatory. I'm in favor of governmental regulation. Absolutely. We need bigger government, not less government. Absolutely.
They're so great, huh? Government. They have all the answers.
Absolutely. No, they do not have all the answers, but we're selective. That doesn't mean we should have government. When I'm in the bedroom with my wife, I want the government to stay the hell away.
I agree.
We're very, very selective about what we do. I was pleased to be one of the first to get the vaccination. I stuck out my left arm, and it hurt for 2 days, and I was fine with that. And I have a very good friend who got flu-like
My parents got it,
symptoms.
sir.
Good,
My parents got it.
good,
I'm not opposed to people getting it, sir.
good.
I'm not. I don't want it for me at this time.
Well, you should get it.
I don't want it.
You should get it. Everybody should get it.
So we're on COVID, so let's just discuss that. Have we all heard about the lab leak hypothesis? They're saying that COVID might have come from a lab.
Oh, I don't know where it came from. I mean, this kung flu, this racist nonsense that Trump and his progeny have been. It is just horrific, and it is racist. And I deal with my Chinese students, Chinese and Chinese American. They're utterly appalled.
Yeah, I mean, he should say the CCP flu. If that's his feeling, it's not
I have no
it's
idea
not the
where it
Chinese
came
people.
from.
It's the CCP
It
leadership.
probably came from an animal. We don't know yet. What the
Or
scientific
Iran,
data-
or Russia. It would be perfect, actually, for another adversary of America to release it in Wuhan and frame the
We have
Chinese.
to deal with this. There will be another pandemic, probably in your lifetime, probably not in mine because of the age.
We hope.
I know how to read the actuarial tables, and it doesn't bother me at all. I've lived a good and productive life. I will try to continue to live that and be as productive as I can. But, I live to 100, fine. I don't expect it. I've lived a good life. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to do it.
Good
Be
stuff.
as active and as vigorous as I can. But I don't fear death. I will live. I continue to. I'm sorry, Harold. I've got to go because I've got a meeting.
Okay.
Okay, can your last comment be on going forward? How do we fix the racial divide? How do we fix this problem? What do we do?
Yeah,
I
what's
don't know, we
next
just keep
steps?
working. That's what I tell my students. I've done everything I can do to bridge it, to work as a civil rights activist, to bring people together. I will not see it in my lifetime. There are a couple of really good things about aging, is that you realize you're not going to see the world that you want. And I'm sanguine about that. I'm also sanguine about this. You do whatever you can throughout the course of your life. You do it as well as you can, as vigorously as you can. You try to push life in the directions that you believe are important as long as you can. And then you try to influence others to do that. That's the best that you can do. And you smile about it, and you go home and have a good beer.
Remember to smell the roses and
Professor
enjoy
Paul
your
von
life.
Blum, everybody.
Professor
Can you hang
Blum.
out with us a little?